And we're live. Hello, Bernie.
How are you, Joe?
Wonderful. Pleasure to meet you.
Nice.
Joe Rogan backs Sanders. Now, I can't say endorse, because technically Rogan didn't endorse Sanders. He more so said, I'm voting for Bernie. Now, this gets tweeted out by Sanders because it is a big deal. Joe Rogan has a major platform. Sanders tweets this out. Immediately, cue the fake outrage. Cue the SJWs setting themselves on fire and throwing their bodies off of a bridge. But also, at the exact same time, cue the millions of people, I think it was 11 million people that watched this video, 11 or 12 million people that saw Sanders for an hour with a full-fledged conversation, amazing conversation, with Joe Rogan. Cue those 11 million people that got the opportunity to see Sanders not on some debasing debate stage, but actually to have a full-fledged conversation with a person asking really good questions, some of which were challenging, but also allowing him to speak his piece, meaning a full-fledged, full-throated, free-flowing conversation. Cue the millions of people that don't pay attention to politics, that is fed up with politics, that looks at this stuff and say, all of them are corrupt, all of them are crooked, all of them are being bought. I don't want anything to do with it. It doesn't affect me materially. It doesn't help my life. So, I don't care. But they listen to Rogan. And not just listen to Rogan, heard him say Sanders has been consistent his entire life. I'm probably voting for Sanders. My point is, whatever you want to think of Joe Rogan, as a flat fact, he has a major platform. And it's a platform that crosses a large swath of the population. And in crossing that large swath of the population, to the chagrin of the Democratic Party, to the chagrin of the Tulsi of the Hillary supporters, and to the supporters of Elizabeth Warren, and to the chagrin of pretty much any other person that wishes to see Sanders gurgle in his own blood while they drink a cold beer, to their chagrin. This matters. Just like that 11 million video, this video right here, just like this video when it came out was thunderous because of how good this particular video was and how good this interview was. This, let's call it endorsement light, also matters. Joe Rogan backs Sanders. Welcome to the Soapbox. My name is Jamal Thomas. This is the Progressive Soapbox. Guys, if you dig this content, please like, share, subscribe. You can always support. PayPal, Patreon. I was at work today. We were busy much of the day. We're trying to get the show started, and we're going to try to do dry runs on Monday. I tried to get the dry runs aired. They don't want to air the dry runs. They want to have the real finished product. So hopefully we can get these out the way fast, and it goes pretty well. And I saw this come up. And I thought, wow, Joe Rogan, who at one point was saying he was backing Tulsi, he didn't care about anybody else. In this particular case, he says I'm probably voting for Sanders. That is actually a big deal. And I thought, that's amazing. I wasn't the only one that thought that was amazing. Bernie Sanders also thought that was amazing because he tweeted out this. Essentially the video of Joe Rogan saying this.
You can vote for in the primary.
I think I'll probably vote for Bernie. Him as a human being, when I was hanging out with him, and I believe in him. I like him a lot. What Bernie stands for is a guy who, well, look, you could dig up dirt on every single human being that's ever existed if you catch them in their worst moment and you magnify those moments and you cut out everything else and you only display those worst moments. That said, you can't find very many with Bernie. He's been insanely consistent his entire life. He's basically been saying the same thing, been for the same thing his whole life. And that, in and of itself, is a very powerful structure to operate from.
If that's not an endorsement, I don't know what the hell that is. Now, again, true, he didn't say I endorse Sanders, but that's a fucking campaign video. If you look at the people who are coming out for Sanders, it's that. That video could have been made by somebody who came out with an endorsement. That's an amazing clip. And, by the way, also correct. He's also correct. Sanders is one of the few people that you can go back and look over the course of his videos, and for the most part, for the last 30, 40 years, he's been saying, for the most part, the same thing. He's right. That is indeed a powerful structure in which to operate from. And you heard him say, well, I trust the guy. I believe in the guy. Why? Because again, he's been consistent for 40 years. My point is the authenticity is a powerful, powerful motivator in regards to, I don't necessarily agree with everything, but I don't think he's fucking around with me and these other people. I don't trust those other people. Rogan. Rogan is right. Now, the fake outrage and the SJWs who are setting themselves on fire. I looked at this with, I gotta be honest, I thought it was pathetic. Now, both camps. This is Newsweek. Listen to some of the stuff that's being said. So this is Newsweek. Bernie Sanders' use of Joe Rogan's endorsement sparks debate. The campaign didn't need to amplify it. Why not? It's an amazing endorsement. By the way, I've said on more than one occasion, I like the Joe Rogan show. Joe Rogan is one of the most fascinating people. Now, what I mean by that is, I've said before in one of my other videos that he has an interview style that is massively underrated in regards to how good he is at talking to people. And the catch here, and the reason that people don't necessarily, or their consternation, the pearl clutching that's taking place with this, a lot of that has to do with Joe Rogan just being a person. Not overtly political in the way that he operates. He's a person. And fact of the matter is that he's not overtly political in the way that he operates. Make people like him that much more. It's a breath of fresh air. He brings pretty much anybody on the show. He has free-flowing conversations with them. And the fact that the conversations are free-flowing, the fact that he allows the people to speak their piece in this kind of fluid, open way and not necessarily caricatured in the way that mainstream media or some of the other publications that just want to cancel people. No, he allows them to speak their piece. But in the context of speaking their piece, they get into trouble at times. I've seen him put a knife in people in the most slowly elegant of ways. Bari Weiss, the person who's there, she got hung on her own petard, whatever they call it, petard, when she went after Tulsi. And she did not know what the hell she was talking about. And Rogan asking her very basic questions that mainstream media wouldn't ask, because again, mainstream media has a certain perspective of things. So Bari Weiss attacking Tulsi Gabbard, they would have just accepted it as fair enough. But Joe Rogan didn't do that, and he just asked the very basic question. Why do you say that? To which she did not know what the fuck she was talking about. Jordan Peterson, same thing. Somebody who gets canceled all the time. And, you know, you can joke some of the ideas and everything else, but it's different to sit there and have a conversation with the guy as opposed to just, I'm canceling the guy. I don't want to talk to him. I don't want to hear anything the guy says. Do you realize in that interview with Peterson got caught in a hypocrisy bind where Peterson himself had to say, yeah, you're right. I need to think about that. Why? Because he got caught into something where Rogan asked him, well, look, if this is what you believe, how do you also believe this? It seems that you're giving one a pass, but you're okay when it pertains to something like you. In which case, Jordan Peterson, who was not being attacked in an interview, who was having an actual conversation with the person, wasn't defensive, had to admit, you're right. Why? Because he gets to have the conversation with him. I hope you understand what I mean. There is an elegance to that. And I understand there are times where Joe Rogan may say things you don't particularly agree with. He's a person. People tend to say things that you don't particularly agree with. But let's just be very clear. It is childish and the height of immaturity to try to take something that you don't particularly like, which is in many respects a lot of you and less of him, and try to take the totality of his being and constrain it and bind it into that one little label. A, it's irrational. B, there's no reality to it at all if you're trying to take the totality of a person and fit it into one specific label. And C, it's irrational. He's a fully formed person who's going to have ideas and opinions that you don't particularly agree with, and other times you will agree with. In my experience, bright, curious, and I think in part, I would say, if you're looking at several of his videos, but especially his UFO videos, inquisitive. Like, these are positive traits for an individual to have. And I'm sorry, it is the height of childishness to go with this. Democrats, in my experience, are perfectly okay with allowing people and their material needs to go by the wayside. You don't believe me? Look over the last 40 years. How often do you hear talk of poverty, talk of things that materially benefit and affect the individual themselves? Why do you think 50% of the population don't vote? Because they're out of touch. What they will do, though, is police your speech. They will try, or some of them will try to tell you what you should be able to say, what you should be able to think. And don't misunderstand me. I don't want anybody being racist or belligerent. But the catch here is the margins that they use in order to cast people as such oftentimes are so overboard. They're attacking him, talking about the guy's transphobic. I'm sorry, he's not transphobic. If he is talking about sports and he is talking about a situation where a person has a sex change and they're fighting other women, you can have an opinion on that and not be considered transphobic. I hope you understand what I mean. Having an opinion on something that you don't particularly like does not, in fact, make that particular person racist or sexist or bigoted or anything else. Yes, it is true in some cases. It could be, but oftentimes it's not. And in those situations, try to cancel the individual because you don't particularly like something the person says. I haven't seen any of this stuff in the way that they try to characterize him. I've watched his show. Like I said, there are opinions that I agree with, some I disagree with. But this notion that you could, Bernie Sanders shouldn't boost what is a major, major endorsement because you don't particularly like an opinion that he's expressed. Nonsense. I really like Bernie Sanders, and I'm disappointed in the campaign boost Rogan, who's made some anti-trans comments. I really hope the campaign reconsiders, says activist Alex Goldstein. Yeah, kick rocks. The cartoonist Eli Valley tweeted, seconded, Rogan can vote for whomever he wants, but I don't think Bernie campaign should be forcing or touting a transphobic creep who gives a platform to Nazis. This is what I mean. Think about what I've just told you in the sense of the cancel culture nonsense. The SJWs of the bunch. The totality of who Joe Rogan is. They've constrained it into transphobic creep. He's not a person anymore. He's a transphobic creep that Bernie Sanders shouldn't blow up. Whether they realize it or not. The public, massive public, watches that show and appreciates him for being able to have those conversations, to have those ideas, to have those points of view, to be able to express that stuff without necessarily screaming that somebody is sexist, racist, bigoted, etc., etc., etc. The public approves of his show by definition of how popular that particular show is. I hope you understand what I mean. You can try to plant him into whatever pigeonhole you want to plant him into. Fact of the matter is, he is just a person like anybody else. I get annoyed with the policing of the speech stuff. There was a Democrat that I used to work with, one of the owners of the company. And this is a guy who would say, yeah, I think rich people should get all the money in the world that they can earn. But then would say, I told him to man up one day. He says, oh, I don't like that word. I mean, I have a daughter and, I don't want my daughter to think, yeah, man up. Man, cowboy the fuck up. This is a big deal. Now, there are some people. So don't misunderstand me. This stuff is subjective. This is not a situation where Hillary Clinton is using apex predator Harvey Weinstein to be her surrogate in order to go out in the most profoundest of ironies and call Sanders sexist. This is not that. Nobody gave Clinton shit for that, but that was her guy. That was her apex pervert. That was the guy who she assisted in trying to keep that information out with the fact that he was an apex pervert. This isn't Warren boosting the person who's the homophobic trans surrogate that she had out there who was putting all those vitriolic, hateful tweets about gays and Asians. Nope, that's not this at all. This is not even the same situation of Hillary Clinton backing war criminal, her friend, Henry Kissinger. He has rivers of blood on his hands. They're mad at Joe Rogan because Joe Rogan speaks his piece. He gives you his opinion, like it or not, and he holds his shape. And in this particular case, he's pushing for somebody who will attend to the material needs of the population is authentic in a way that is atypical of the political space. You heard it right there for yourself. That's why he's voting for Sanders. Now, I understand SJWs may feel some kind of way about this, and you can feel how you feel about it. I suppose that and a nickel will get you a cold cup of coffee. By the same token, this is a massive, massive deal. And the pigeonhole or the box that you yourself are in is not the same box that most people are in. Meaning, Rogan hits a large swath of the population. And as a politician, one of your hardest jobs is to try to get into those various boxes that in many respects have shut you out. You want to know what does? Rogan. This is a massive endorsement. As for the fake ragers, the people who, just want to, I'm angry. Yeah, some people are being legitimate, even though I think it's somewhat immature. But there's some people who are just mad that he gets the endorsement at all. There's some Democrats, I would imagine, that wanted to sit with Rogan that Rogan didn't give a shit about. And in this particular case, what they probably know, what they recognize, is a major endorsement of sorts. Let's call it endorsement light, but it's major. And the best that they can do in this case is to try to taint a win. Essentially, yeah, you foreclosed on my house, but I'm going to take a shit in the refrigerator. That'll learn you. Yes, you can be petty, and you can fake rage in order for political reasons to try to taint what is literally a solid win. But it's not really going to matter. I mean, ultimately, this video is going out, and whatever small probability of people that the media has played up that has some feelings about this, the overwhelming majority of the people who either listen to Joe Rogan or who back Sanders is going to love this. This is a win. The hysterical people bitching and moaning about it can feel how they feel. The reality is, in the grand scheme of things, for the overwhelming majority, I would argue, it's a win. That's an amazing video. Unprovoked, unpushed, Sanders had nothing to do with getting Rogan to do it. He did it on his own. Like I said, I don't think the totality of people can necessarily be boiled down into a label. And by definition, everything that makes up a person, the notion that you're going to put that person into this kind of little box and this little label has everything to do with you and very little to do with that other person, the box. The other person is not in that box. You're in that box. And again, this is not me saying, I've always said this stuff goes on a gradient of sorts. From an intersectionality standpoint, we should back each other in the sense of people attacking, race, sex, gender, anti-Semitism, all that stuff. We should be in alignment with holding back the night on that particular reality. I agree. By the same token, it's a secondary thing to say that you're going to try to shut down how people express themselves when it hits a margin that you're dramatically uncomfortable with. That's different. I hope you understand what I mean. One is not looking through the world through a lens of this person's race or this person's sex, even though those things may come up and those things may need to be addressed. To me, and I've argued this all the time, the issue is class. It is the material needs and the material things that affect individuals. And getting stuck in this context of identity breaks up the population. And it is to some degree divisive. That's whether Democrats do it or whether Republicans do it, because Republicans do the same shit in a different way. This is a win. Get over yourselves. Set yourself on fire, throw yourself off a bridge, but at the very least recognize that he has a major platform, and this is definitely a win. Definitely a win. Benjamin Buckley. SJWs cause rational people to vote for Trump. Unfortunately, Benjamin Buckley, yeah, sometimes. I mean, and look, again, this stuff is somewhat subjective, right? I mean, is Martin Luther King an SJW? And you go further, and that sort of question of like, well, yeah, but he was in fucking hostile territory. He was actually pushing back against the Knight in a civil rights movement. This is kind of what I mean when I say subjective. A lot of what takes place from the standpoint of cancel culture, though, is not in hostile territory like that. And it boils down to this notion of policing what people say and how people say it. And again, I'm not talking about people being belligerent or just outright racist, none of that stuff. I'm talking about regular people just having conversations that sometimes people are overreactive to and the way people are trying to express what they express. And sometimes it's not even the context of what they're saying, just how they say it. Caitlin Johnston was an example. The context of what she was saying gave a completely different picture than the characterization that people were trying to pigeonhole her in. It was bullshit. I feel the same way about this. Dilly Watt 357, they are trying to force another Jenk type apology. Sanders would be fucking insane if he apologizes. He shouldn't have apologized the first time around to Joe Biden for something that was absolutely true. Now for him, he doesn't like throwing punches like that, so fair enough. By the same token, I would hope that there's somebody in his campaign, if not him himself, recognizes this is a win. You, as Bernie Sanders, don't go on Joe Rogan if you had qualms about getting endorsement from Joe Rogan. I hope you understand what I mean. So hopefully he has enough sense not to be cowed by a few, hysterical people. Black privilege, the ultimate average Joe. Yeah. And by the way, I don't mean that in a bad way. Like I've said, he has an amazing interview style that oftentimes I think goes understated. This ability to allow people to talk and express themselves is not something you entirely get. And to get it not in an overt political way, if that makes sense. I mean, whoever Joe Rogan talks to, he is dealing with them in the sandbox to which they exist in. But he's doing it in a way where he's asking questions that are interesting, in some cases challenging, but allows them to speak their piece, as opposed to trying to just shut them up. It's one thing if you and I have a discussion. It's another thing if you are having a debate. If you're having a discussion with me, all sorts of shit may come up. You may agree, you may disagree, but at the very least, we'll understand where that disagreement is. It's not a characterization, if that makes sense. That's one of the beauties of that particular show. And that's, I think, one of the reasons why I like the show. And again, this is whether I agree with him or not on a particular thing. I'm not going to agree with everybody on everything, but the notion that, you shouldn't boost his endorsement because nonsense. Absolute nonsense. I'll leave this here. I mean, this video's gone a bit longer than I wanted, but I hope I made my point. The issue is class. And yes, there will be issues that we get divided upon based on tribe and that type of stuff. So fair enough. But just because somebody says something you don't like does not, in fact, make it racist or sexist or bigoted. I mean, for fuck's sake, they're trying to say Sanders is sexist for being in the race. I mean, think about that shit. So Rogan can't be pigeonholed in that way. And yes, Rogan has an amazing show. He has an amazing platform. And whatever the hysterical people are going with and setting themselves on fire with, whatever they're going to go with. The truth is that the overwhelming majority of the people, especially the people that watch that show and people who are not ensconced in this political space and who chafe at this notion of being told how they're supposed to think and express that type of stuff, these kind of gachus that completely ignore the context of what the individual is saying in order to try to find something to just hit the person with, that shit's aggravating. And in a political sense, it loses you credibility. I mean, do you honestly think that Bernie Sanders was sexist for running against Hillary Clinton? And do you think it undermines her claim about being a feminist when she's willing, for purely political expedience, to throw that card in the ring and continuously throw it over and over and over again? Mind you, this was the person who was surrogate Harvey Weinstein, who she was helping to cover the fact that the guy was an apex pervert. But yeah, she's a feminist. And the issue of Sanders and Rogan. Get out of here. All right, and last one, Cool Blue. The Democratic Party establishment, corporatists, and corrupt use identity politics to exploit, fool minorities into believing they are the best for them. Well, yes, but it's a little bit more than that. I mean, it's not just belief in the sense. Some of it is historical momentum. There's that. I mean, you can't necessarily ignore that part. The African American community ends up working with the Democratic Party. Martin Luther King essentially puts it on record about the Vietnam War, and the African American community got mad at Martin Luther King for pointing out we shouldn't be over there killing Vietnamese. But by the same token, when you're bringing it, so there's the momentum in that sense, meaning from the standpoint of race in that sense. But there's a reality to it. I mean, when you had all of the essentially the Dixiecrats jump into the Republican Party after the civil rights movement, legislation and voting rights, all that stuff was being passed, African Americans full well knew that the creatures were in the other party. Not saying it's the totality of them. There are plenty of Republicans that are just unempathetic and just want to get their tax cuts. But you have some who are not just for the tax cuts. Let's say it that way. We were not unaware of that. It's almost like branded in our DNA of sorts, where we get that. So it's not entirely just fooled into believing they're best for the... It's not just that. I mean, there is somewhat of a reality to it in regards to, you know, we're going to be a placeholder and you're going to let us do whatever we want and we're going to keep the monsters at bay. And we're just going to focus on identity. That way we can ignore the material needs of all these people, because identity is something that is personal and it's close to each individual. And if somebody is attacking it, you're probably going to be against the person who's attacking it. So the Republican Party is not going to bring up the economic system. Neither do we. Let's focus on identity and let's just have that fight. And then they continuously lose on that fight and still go back to it. Meaning, you know, you have Clinton. Al Gore didn't necessarily fight on that particular mark, but Clinton lost. I don't remember what John Kerry was running on, but the Democratic Party for a while, at least within my political memory, has been purely in this identity camp. And I don't think it has done them any favors. Not just that. It's aggravating. It's divisive. I'm just saying. I saw the most condescending article ever is circulating about Joe Rogan. The one faction of libs is getting so arrogant. Yeah, arrogant is an understatement. I don't think it's a getting type thing. I think they were already there. Yes, condescending. But like I said, what's more true? Is he really that little label, meaning the totality of him is in the little box that they themselves got offended by? Because, by the way, just because you got offended by something doesn't necessarily mean the thing is actually offensive. That could be a factor of you, not necessarily a factor of the particular event. They can think whatever they think of Joe Rogan. Joe Rogan's size of his platform in and of itself gets across, his level of popularity, but you only have to watch the show. Like, if you ever watch just a few of his shows, you get across a very thoughtful, very contemplative, a very inquisitive person. Emphasis on person. Ideas you might like, some you don't. That's all he is. That's all anybody is. The political correctness shit. Ultimately, who he is a breath of fresh air to a large section of the population. And that breath of fresh air to the large section of the population has just gave win to backing Sanders. This is a win. They can complain, they can bitch, they can moan, they can do all that. Some of them are fake, some of them are immature. Either way, Joe Rogan backs Sanders. Like, share, subscribe. Thanks all.